From 793 to 1066, groups of people from Scandinavia began to attack the coastal regions around them. Over time, their influence expanded so widely that they reached territories as far as North America and the Middle East. These people are now known to us as the Vikings. The story begins in 793, when a group of foreign attackers launched an assault on the island of Lindisfarne, located off the eastern coast of England. Their target was a monastery, a religious site. The attackers caused massive destruction and looted all the valuables before retreating to their boats. Although the attackers didn't fully destroy the monastery, the island's residents were left in shock and fear, as they had never encountered such attackers before. By the time they could mount a defense, the invaders had already escaped by boat. The raid of 793 marked the beginning of a series of raids that lasted for many years. In the following years, similar groups would arrive, raid, and leave. These attackers came to be called the Vikings. From 793 to approximately 250 years later, the Vikings wreaked havoc in surrounding regions, and this period is referred to as the Age of the Vikings. There are many misconceptions about the Vikings. One of the most common is the belief that they were all part of a single religion, race, or empire. This is not true. The Vikings were essentially Scandinavian raiders who attacked coastal regions before quickly retreating. The term Viking is a broad label used to describe these people. Looking at today's world map, most Viking raids originated from 3 Scandinavian countries: Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Another misconception is that all Vikings were warriors, which is also false. While many people lived in Scandinavia, only a small group, the Vikings, were involved in raids. The majority of these people were farmers or fishermen, and the raids they carried out were primarily to gather resources. An interesting aspect of Viking culture is that the term Viking wasn't originally used to describe people, but was a verb meaning to raid or to pirate. So, if I were to say today, I am going to Viking, it would mean that I am going to raid a coastal town, steal its goods, and return home with them. This activity was called Viking, and those who took part in it were known as Vikings. At this time, Scandinavia was a region where people lived in small, scattered groups with no central ruler or government. As a result, each small group had its own chief or leader who would lead them in raids. A natural question arises: why did the Vikings feel the need to raid other places? Why didn't they just settle peacefully in Scandinavia? There were several reasons. First, Scandinavia is a cold and harsh environment. As families grew, people realized that their current locations couldn't support their increasing populations, so they needed more resources, prompting them to raid coastal towns. Second, there was fierce competition among the chiefs of the small groups, each seeking to strengthen their own position. This rivalry drove them to raid other regions for more resources. Third, when European ships passed through Scandinavian waters, the Vikings noticed these ships had advanced technology and valuable goods. The Vikings thought that by attacking these ships and taking their goods, they could gain access to that wealth and technology. By 793, the Vikings launched their first major raid on the British Isles, specifically targeting a monastery. They chose a monastery because they noticed these religious sites had many valuable items but were lightly guarded. European Christians believed no one would attack such a sacred place, but the Vikings, not being Christians, had no qualms about attacking religious sites. In 793, they attacked the monastery on the island of Lindisfarne. The following year, they attacked monasteries in Scotland, and the year after, in Ireland. By 799, they had reached France. Due to these repeated attacks on religious sites, Europeans began to believe that the Vikings had no regard for religion or God, and they labeled them as barbarians or savages. For the next few decades, Viking raids were largely hit-and-run operations, with the primary targets being the British Isles, especially Ireland. Over time, the Vikings realized that the political situation in Europe was unstable. Initially, they used hit-and-run tactics, but as time passed, their raids became bolder, and they began to settle in the regions they attacked. In 840, the Frankish Empire, which includes present-day France and Germany, was under the rule of Louis the Pious. After his death, his son Lothar invited the Vikings to help him fight his brothers for control of the throne. This made the Vikings realize that European kings were willing to pay them for assistance. Soon after, the Vikings began extorting money from kings, threatening to raid their towns unless they paid. In 871, King Alfred the Great of England defeated the Danish Viking army. By the early 10th century, Alfred's descendants began to reclaim the regions previously taken by the Vikings. Eventually, in 952, the last Scandinavian king, Eric Bloodaxe, was killed by Alfred's descendants, and England was unified under one empire. Although Viking influence in England largely faded by this time, Viking armies remained active in other parts of Europe. In 842, they attacked the town of Nantes in France, and by 859, they had reached Pisa. In 911, the king of West Francia made a deal with a Viking leader named Rollo. The king promised Rollo a large piece of land in northern France if he agreed to prevent other Vikings from attacking the region. This area would later become known as Land of the Northmen, the land where modern-day Normandy is located. Interestingly, during World War II, Normandy was of great strategic importance during the 1944 invasion of France, known as Operation Overlord. By the 9th century, as the Vikings raided Ireland, Scotland, Britain, and Northern Europe, they also expanded westward, reaching Iceland. In Iceland, they established communities, including one led by the violent Viking Eric the Red. After being exiled from Iceland for his violent actions, Eric moved to Greenland, where he founded a new settlement and became the king of the region. Eric's children, Leif Erikson and Freydis Eiríksdóttir, continued their journey westward, reaching Newfoundland, which is now part of modern-day Canada. It is believed that the Vikings reached North America long before Christopher Columbus or other European explorers. However, the Vikings never established a permanent colony in North America, as Freydis Eiríksdóttir became angry when she was not given a suitable home and caused problems for the Vikings. The second phase of the Viking Age began in the mid-10th century with the emergence of a unified Denmark under King Harald Bluetooth. By this time, the Danish people had converted to Christianity. King Harald Bluetooth's reign is also the reason why we have the term Bluetooth in modern technology today. With a unified empire, the Vikings' raids grew larger in scale, led by royal families. In 1030, King Svein Forkbeard of Denmark led an army to England, where he defeated the king. Nearly all of England came under Danish rule. However, after Svein's death, his son Canute became king. After Canute's death, his two sons ruled until their deaths in 1042. Then, Edward the Confessor, the son of the king who had been overthrown by the Vikings, returned to reclaim the throne. In 1066, during the reign of Harold Godwinson, another great Viking king, Harald Hardrada launched an attack on England. Harold Godwinson fought and defeated the Vikings, but shortly after, Duke William of Normandy invaded England, leading to the Battle of Hastings. Harold Godwinson was killed in this battle, and William the Conqueror became the King of England. Thus, the age of the Vikings came to a close in 1066. William the Conqueror, who eventually became the King of Britain, was of Scandinavian descent, but he is not considered a Viking, as he was part of a much larger empire. The original Vikings were not part of any single empire. They were small raiding groups. By the time the various empires, such as the Danish, Norwegian, or Swedish armies took over, the original Viking Age had ended. Until then, take care of yourself. Thank you for watching this video, and please subscribe to my channel.